Some Western leaders are claiming this year's Arab uprisings were partly inspired by the invasion of Iraq and the toppling of Saddam Hussein. Britain's Foreign Secretary William Hague said once people saw the regional strongman deposed, it sowed the seeds of insurrection. But these leaders have much less to say about recent revelations that, far from being the Libyan opposition's friend, MI6 and the CIA assisted Colonel Gaddafi in rendering his enemies back to Tripoli, where many are believed to have been tortured. British Prime Minister David Cameron has tried to dampen speculation by announcing all allegations will be investigated in due course. Well, we're going to discuss this in this edition of Africa Today.
Documents showing that Western countries helped former Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi abuse and torture dissidents have emerged. The documents were found by workers from the campaign group Human Rights Watch. They showed Britain's MI6 and CIA deliberately aided the former leader target opposition figures and in some cases assisted in the torture of victims before they were handed over to Gaddafi. This revelation has angered Libyans and the National Transitional Council. It's also been revealed that the current military commander for Tripoli, Abdel Hakim Berhaj, was among those captured and rendered to Libya by the CIA. Relations with the Gaddafi's regime improved after the colonel abandoned his nuclear development program in 2004. This has now led to concerns about the genuineness of Allied forces in helping to bring about change in Libya and whether they can be trusted. With the extent of the cooperation more extensive than previously thought, Africa Today examines the true nature of the links between the CIA, MI6 and Muammar Gaddafi.
Hello, I'm Henry Bonsu and this is Africa Today. Whenever a dictator is driven from his bunker, it usually throws up a treasure trove of information about how he maintained his security apparatus. So when activists found themselves in the Tripoli office of Musa Kusa, Colonel Gaddafi's former spy chief, they knew they'd uncover some pretty unsavory secrets. But the documents unearthed by Human Rights Watch reveal a shocking degree of cooperation between the Gaddafi regime and Western intelligence agencies. Not just rendition flights to Libya, but suggested questions to interrogators, information on dissidents outside the country, and cosy letters. So how serious is this? And could it undermine the trust Libya's new rulers have with their allies? With me in the studio are Rupert Nicol, the security and defence commentator, and from the Democratic Party Libya, Sabri Malek. We've got the former MI5 intelligence officer Mani Mashon joining us on the line from Dusseldorf. And we're also joined by Press TV correspondent Johnny Miller, who is in Tripoli. Johnny, we're going to start off with you. We're talking about a couple of very senior individuals, indeed Abdul Hakim Belhaj, who of course is a commander now in Tripoli, and Abu Muntir, who was with the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, as was Abdul Hakim Belhaj. What are people saying about this in Tripoli? Has it made big news there as it has here?
Well, let me just first of all warn you, communications are very bad here, so I can't hear you very well, Henry. But I think your question was how people are reacting here in Tripoli.
Yeah.
Well, I can tell you Mr. Belhaj is a very respected man in Libya. He's obviously the commander of Libyan forces in Tripoli. So this is just one of many news stories which are coming out of Libya at the moment as the regime is on its final days. These documents, of course, found by Human Rights Watch inside one of the government buildings it's definitely a big story. I think Libyans will be worried about it, especially as at the moment they're very happy about NATO's involvement. You'll see British flags, French flags, American flags everywhere. Everyone you speak to comes up to me presuming I'm a Westerner, and saying thank you to your country, thank you to David Cameron for helping us out in our revolution. But some people I've spoken to are a bit worried, they're a bit skeptical about Western involvement, and I think what this story does go to highlight is that these Western countries have in the past not necessarily cared about the best wishes of the Libyan people. That's what the story sort of highlights for some people. However, there's a lot of stories in Tripoli at the moment, and they're enjoying their freedom and the revolution and their continued revolution. But some people, yes, a bit worried and a bit worried about what this story highlights.
Well, I'm going to put that question to you, actually, here with me in the studio, Sabri Malek from the Democratic Party, Libya. How much of a concern is this for you as a Libyan who's been in opposition to Colonel Gaddafi?
It is of great concern, of course. The problem we have in the Arab world is that there has always been very strong ties between the Western governments and Western intelligence agencies and the dictators in the Arab world. This gave rise to fundamentalism and extremism in our part of the world. And
how did that give rise to fundamentalism and extremism?
Because extremists think that all bad things come from the West because of that. So this is why we have Al-Qaeda and similar organizations. I'm afraid what the West has done since is that by giving even more support to these dictators, and the episode of the relationship between Libyan intelligence, Gaddafi's intelligence service, and Western intelligence services, very cozy relationship, gave rise to even more demands in Libya for severing ties with these agencies. So there is a lot of resentment in Libya and in the Arab street in general.
Which aspects of this did you find particularly distasteful? I mean, Amnesty called the rendition, the letters between Musa Kusa and M. We think we know who M is, who now works for British Petroleum, actually BP. A really murky, disgraceful affair. Are you appalled by that, or do you kind of understand it in a way? Because, of course, they wanted to bring Colonel Gaddafi in from the cold.
I don't believe that there is such a thing as bringing him from the cold. Gaddafi has always had strong ties with Western intelligence. This saga about a nuclear weapons program in Libya is neither here nor there. The West was having a lot of problems in Iraq, and they had to come up with something to show for it, and they went to Gaddafi and they invented this nuclear weapons in Libya. There was hardly any program of the kind.
Let's go to Annie Machon, who is a former MI5 intelligence officer. You heard what our colleague had to say just a moment ago, Sabri Malek, saying that actually Western intelligence agencies have always had very close relationships with some Arab leaders, particularly dictators like Colonel Gaddafi. This has caused extremism, and this talk of a weapons of mass destruction program was just a fig leaf. He didn't really have much of one.
No, I would agree. It was very much talked up in the 1990s that he was trying to develop something, but really the Western intelligence agencies didn't have a very good feel for what he was up to at all. In fact, they had always seen him as a priority one intelligence target ever since he took power from the British-backed royal family, King Idris, way back in 1969. And of course, he had been a thorn in their side for many decades, backing many other terrorist and revolutionary groups like the Provisional IRA and the Baader-Meinhof gang, Abu Nidal and ETA. So, in fact, there was a lot of intelligence interest in Libya, but much of it was backing his enemies for many of those decades, particularly Islamic extremist groups like the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, which of course was funded in the 1990s to try and assassinate Colonel Gaddafi, and they were funded by MI6, the UK intelligence agency. So Gaddafi has always had perhaps more to fear from Islamic or Islamist groups, certainly extremist groups, particularly when they are backed and encouraged by the Western intelligence agencies. And it was very strange, very interesting to see some of the documents that emerged from Musa Kusa's abandoned office in the last couple of weeks, where it's shown that, of course, after 9/11 and after the rapprochement with the West, he and his intelligence agencies were working very closely with MI6 and the CIA to render and torture suspected terrorists.
I can quote from something he's said to have told Sami al-Sadi, also known as Abu Montia, the deputy head of that Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, and he said, "You've been running away from us, but since 9/11 I can pick up the phone and call MI6 or the CIA, and they give us all the info we want on you. You have nowhere to hide." Just how compromising is all of this stuff? I mean, we talked back then in the late 90s and early 2000s of an ethical dimension to our foreign policy, but it looks as though this was nothing of the sort.
Well, Well, talk is cheap, and the British Foreign Office likes to talk about ethical foreign policies, but in fact that's never been realpolitik for them. Once 9/11 had happened, of course, the rules did tend to change. So we got a situation where Gaddafi could come in from the cold and could work with these intelligence agencies to track down Islamist terrorists all over the planet. But I mean, as I said, he had always had more to fear from Islamists within his own country who were trying to topple him than most Western countries had up until that point. And let's not forget that he was the one who, Libya was the one who actually first issued an international arrest warrant for bin Laden. That was way back in 1988, but that was sort of played down by the West. So he's had a very difficult relationship with the West, and even with the rapprochement, I mean, since, over the last 2 years or so, he's been talking about a Pan-African unity, and also perhaps trying to move away from issues like the petrodollar and issue things like a Pan-African gold dinar that could be used to trade for oil. I think those are the issues that really tipped him over the edge again and made him a priority one intelligence target for the West. So, everyone talks about oil and everyone talks about Islamic extremist terrorism and things like that in Libya, but actually I think it comes down to the money and the fact that he was trying to unite Africa to protect their own interests against Western predators.
Annie Masham, for the moment, thank you very much. Let's bring it back to the studio. Rupert Nicole, defence and security commentator. I'm just wondering then what kinds of problems this poses for the British government, because of course David Cameron says we do not endorse torture, we don't condone it. The Foreign Secretary here, William Hague, we don't condone torture. His predecessors say they knew nothing about it, Jack Straw and Tony Blair. But it looks very bad, doesn't it?
Well, it looks bad, but of course it's already been said, this is practical politics. Gaddafi has swung backwards and forwards over the years, and so have we. British foreign policy has always been about de facto power and dealing with the people who really have the power. There was a time, if you remember, that Gaddafi, even when he was being most vilified, was also the person who pretty well solved the Carlos the Jackal hijack by allowing the aircraft to land and insisting that nobody should be harmed. He plays practical politics too. And there are times in recent history when it's been useful to him to work with the West against Islamist groups. Equally, I think we've pretty well put our money on the table as far as NATO support for the current revolution is concerned. If he had to be there, we wanted to be able to deal with him, and if we can get rid of him using the ground forces and providing the air power that's required, then we were happy to do that as well.
So given that, how much faith should campaigners like Human Rights Watch, like Amnesty have in the ongoing British review into the treatment of detainees, and now this extra bit they're going to have to investigate, i.e. what happened to the likes of Abu Muntir, also known as Samir al-Sadi, and others, Abdul Hakim Belhaj?
I know nothing about individual cases, I really don't. I take the long view as an historian, which is, I think we will come to terms with all this.
Yes.
All governments run intelligence agencies, all governments want trade, all governments want to make things work. And there will be a realignment in the light of
the new order.
The new order. It won't be the same people that deal with them. It'll be the same agencies to some extent. As far as possible, it'll be different people. And, the trust resides with individuals anyway.
Okay.
So it seems to me that the world has changed and policy must change with it.
Thank you very much for the moment. Let's have a look at what you've been saying to us via email, Facebook and text. And first of all, via Facebook from Owen in Zimbabwe, he says, Africa has a very flawed judicial and legal system. We are apparently getting overdoses of constitutional discord, particularly in electoral processes. The ICC make biased decisions, but Africa needs to perfecting. That's from Owen in Zimbabwe. Via email from Wale, who is in an unknown location. While we accuse the ICC of threatening peace and reconciliation in Africa, we must know that African leaders have a syndrome of ruthlessness. The ICC must try Gaddafi, Mugabe and Mubarak. And via text from Shujat in the UK, the current revelations of the level and depth of relations of these powers, and especially of their intelligence agencies with Gaddafi and his cronies, goes just to show the level to which these very powers will go to become bedfellows with literally anyone they can if he can be of imperial and strategic value to them. Keep your thoughts flowing to us. Email africa@presstv.co.uk and text to this number +44 7800 008086 and Facebook fan page Africa Today, Press TV London. I'm just going to come back to you, Sabri Malek from the Democratic Party, Libya. It's also being revealed that as recently as December, the British ambassador in Tripoli was inviting a number of senior Libyan army officials to come here to an arms fair to buy all kinds of high-tech equipment, including sniper rifles. And it's now believed that some of these rifles were used against Libyan opposition, revolutionary forces and freedom fighters. How does that make you feel?
Very bad, indeed. I'd like to mention a specific case. It is of a member of the Democratic Party, Mr. Ahmed al-Shaybani. We found out that after the fall of Tripoli, that there are documents in the headquarters of Gaddafi of the British MI6 going into his flat in London and writing a report to Gaddafi's intelligence of very minute details of his life,
saying where he was, his movements,
including what type of tea he drinks and what the color of his bedroom carpet is. And Mr. Ahmed al-Shaybani, I can assure you, he is no terrorist, no extremist. He has no affiliations with Al-Qaeda or any fundamentalist organization. He's a Democrat. Yet British intelligence is selling information like this to Gaddafi's intelligence. It's amazing. It's scandalous. It's worse than Watergate.
And the proof of this is where? Where was this proof? This has been found.
We have the document. Yes, we have the documents of that. It's the question is, what is happening now? Gaddafi's gone. Are Western intelligence services doing the same thing in Bahrain, for example? Are they doing it to the Saudi regime? Of course, Saudi Arabia has a lot of money. Are the Saudi dissidents in London, in Paris, and in America facing the same treatment?
Well, that's the question I've got to put to you, Annie Mashon. You're a former MI5, not MI6 intelligence officer, but you probably know how the sister service works. What do you think? I mean, is this the kind of thing that could be happening? Okay, now the regime in Libya has changed, but there are other friends who are still authoritarian in power in the Middle East who may want the kinds of secrets that MI6 can provide.
I think it's absolutely possible, yes, because certainly in the last decade we've seen that as MI5 and MI6 have had this rapprochement with the former Gaddafi regime, that they in fact were providing spying facilities to the Libyan intelligence agencies. In fact, they were spying on so-called dissidents in the UK in the same way that the Libyan intelligence agencies had been doing in the 1990s. And at that time, of course, MI5 was trying to stop them doing this. So they would see it as supporting the national interest of the UK by helping an ally. And I have no doubt that if they perceive other Middle Eastern dictatorships as useful allies, they will be providing the same sort of services. And I do think this is a problem because then, of course, you get into a situation where, on the word of those intelligence agencies, people can be deemed to be dissidents or terrorists. And in the worst case scenario, they can be snatched, kidnapped, extraordinarily rendered back to their home countries and tortured. And there seems to be very little oversight or accountability into these sort of issues. In fact, Jack Straw, the former Foreign Secretary, went on the record last week to say that, in fact, he couldn't be expected as the Foreign Secretary to know everything that MI6 gets up to. Well, of course, he can't know all the detail, but in terms of big policy decisions about whom they work with and the sort of tactics they use, the Foreign Secretary should indeed have some sort of oversight, democratic accountability over what the spies are doing.
How deep do you think this could possibly go? We've got a review ongoing at the moment, and David Cameron promises that there'll be no stone left unturned. It'll be a thorough, exhaustive review. But what do you think? How far could this go? Because we've only got those two names at the moment, of course, and everyone's talking about them, Abdul Hakim Belhaj and Abu Muntir, but there could be other names that come up.
There may well be other names coming up, but in terms of how effective the inquiry will be, I mean, this is an inquiry that has already been established. It's called the Gibson Inquiry, headed up by Sir Peter Gibson, which was supposed to be looking at allegations of torture of other victims who were extraordinarily rendered, taken to Guantanamo and tortured and things. Now, there are problems because under UK law, the Inquiries Act 2005 the scope and terms and powers of the inquiry can be circumscribed by the very organisations being investigated, i.e. in this case MI5 and MI6. And also Sir Peter Gibson, for 5 years, up until he took up this inquiry, was in fact the Intelligence Services Commissioner. So he was deeply embedded within the infrastructure of the British intelligence community.
So you're saying there's a conflict of interest here?
It's been well highlighted in the UK press. There is indeed a conflict of interest, and he's been cozying up to the senior spy for years. So I'm sure he will want to be seen to be fairly thorough, but whether or not all the dirty details come out is another matter. And as I said, the scope of the inquiry can be circumscribed by the very Whitehall organisations that are being investigated. So I think most people accept that it will be pretty toothless even before it gets going.
So where does this leave us then, Rupert? I'm just wondering, because of course we've had these embarrassing revelations, we've now got an ongoing inquiry which will take account of this new information. We've got people who are running Libya whom the West approves of and who want to set out their own store. Colonel Gaddafi is still not being found as far as we know. Where does this leave us, do you think?
Well, with obviously some egg on the face, but nevertheless, as I say, there is an interesting link actually with Iraq. You dismissed the idea of a link with Iraq, but I knew David Blair, who was the young Telegraph journalist who found Saddam's papers, which amazingly had not been burned. I'm amazed more that this wasn't destroyed before.
Maybe they're leaving in a hurry.
Well, maybe they are, or maybe they actually want to embarrass the successors. That's another issue. But certainly there were papers found there about links with various left-wing organisations. And this reminds me of that. It's amazing the amount that's written down that would be embarrassing if it was found.
I'm just wondering how much faith we should have in the riders that the CIA and MI6 give to these renditions by saying, we would like you to reassure us that you will not torture this person if they are returned to your custody.
Well, look, we know that you can be cynical about things. In a sense, though, it's practical politics again. Yeah. We are appearing to provide a service to Gaddafi. It's perfectly possible that the banal nature of the investigations, or what was discovered, dismissed a problem. Mm-hmm. People can look at potential terrorists and say, well, they're not. We have to be seen, as far as the Americans are concerned, to be leaving no stone unturned with terrorism.
Incorporating fully in the war on terror.
Absolutely. And we also have a fairly large-scale and long-standing connection with strong single people in North Africa and the Middle East. That's now changing, and we're delighted to see it change. I think people have to believe that we made the best of a bad job before, and are hoping to make a better job of the future of the world.
How much faith do you have in that, in what Rupert just said there? Okay, there was realpolitik, investment in big, strong leaders in Africa and the Middle East, but actually now things have changed, and maybe the people in Libya can trust their friends, their new friends, who were previously friends with the man who was holding them in chains for 42 years.
We always have this argument in the West. When something is found to be going wrong, we are told this was the past, but now things are going to change. This is not good enough. What is needed now is strong support for the democratic forces in the Arab world. The Arab Spring has shown that the Arab world want good relationships with the West. Yeah. We are not fundamentalists. These revolutions are not fundamentalist revolutions. They are liberal. They are democratic. Yet Western governments are not doing enough. Certainly, they are not supporting the democratic trend in the Arab world. What is needed is a foreign policy that puts human rights first and not economic interests.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for that. And that's it for today. Thanks to all of you who sent in comments to us. Email africa@presstv.co.uk or text us to this number, +44 7800 008086. Messages will be charged at your local operator rate. Many thanks to our guests. Really passionate, stimulating discussion. They were security analyst, or should I say commentator, Rupert Nichol, Sabri Malek from Democratic Party Libya, former MI5 intelligence officer Annie Mashon, and our correspondent in Tripoli, the Libyan capital, Johnny Miller. Voice was back next week for another edition of Africa Today. Till then, it's goodbye from me. And on behalf of the whole team, thanks again for watching.